let me ask you this. Well, let's say, what's your mind analogy? Let's say a mind is non-physical per se, and we say what it's comprised of, or what it's comprised of is unknown. Then would you say it would be more expected under like a theist that okay, well, if the mind is non-physical, then God has more um probability to unify these minds since you don't have that explanation under a physical scope, right? You don't have that chemistry, you don't have that physics. Would you say it's more expected under a theist type idea or theist hypothesis?
If minds aren't physical, is it more likely under a theist worldview? I don't think so because I don't see I don't I don't see how anything logically follows from that. The only thing we're invoking is our incredulity. Wait, how do non-physical things manifest out of a physical world? I don't know. That's not the same thing as they don't. It's just we don't know. How does God do anything? But literally nobody knows how God does anything at all. So to say, and the problem with this is what people say is God can do anything, which means once we find something that we don't have the explanation for, now all of a sudden God can account for it. Well, no, because the claim that God can do anything is actually kind of a meaningless statement because anything that purports to explain literally everything, and by everything I mean any possible thing, explains nothing in particular. But also, like I said a little bit ago, I think the more valuable question is, okay, how under theism does this happen? There's no explanation for it. It's just a placeholder.
I mean, again, the process is divine. Any theist would agree that we don't have this insight into these divine actions. I don't think that's really like
Yeah, so I don't think you can justify that worldview being responsible for anything then. Because
well,
there's no explanation. It's just a placeholder for our ignorance.
well, for like the idea that the mind's not physical, well, we have this now entity that explains this, right? We have God that explains how it's unified in such a way we understand it, instead of your computer analogy.
But it doesn't explain anything. It just is a stand-in. Like by definition, it is declared to be able to do it. Okay, how does it do it?
I mean, the thing there is that, like, let's go with the alternative route. Then you're just saying the mind is a non-physical thing that's self-sufficient. Now all we have is something called a mind. It's self-sufficient, and it allows us to do all these things. Well, that doesn't really seem any logical at all. But under the theist idea, we have a mind, right? And God allows us to understand things and house these ideas. We have a sufficient explanation for it, right? And then you're going to get into, well, how does he allow us to do these things? Well, then it's just going to reduce back to the fact, well, we don't understand a divine creator, and especially if he's a way, or if he allows us to understand things, it wouldn't make sense that we understand how he does that, because that's the whole process of us understanding. I feel like that's reduced to now absurdity. Of course, we're not going to understand it.
Then you can't give anybody a reason to believe it, because not having an account under physicalism, materialism, whatever, for why minds have the properties they have is not evidence in favor of the other thing. But also, I would say we have excellent evidence of how minds are the product of physicalism, because you can change physical conditions of the brain, and we know for certain that it alters the mental experience. So we may not understand precisely how the process happens, but we can literally induce the process in question. Just get drunk.
I mean, then it just seems like, okay, well, the mind location is unknown, but we go to say that it's affected by these physical things. Like, I don't know if I can say all of that, but these physical things, like, well, I don't know, I'm not gonna say the other word, but yeah, it's just saying it's not affected, but you gonna say that's because in some way the mind and the brain have correlation, right? And now, well, the mind and the brain have correlation. Something that would affect the brain would also affect the mind. You agree? If you get drunk, your brain is affected in a way too, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then if that's correlated, we could just say, well, if the brain's affected and the brain and the mind are correlated, then the mind's affected. But that doesn't go to the conclusion that the mind is physical. This goes to say that interaction with the brain. Then you see, like, you're proposing substance dualism. There's there's two processes of the brain, or two elements or substances of the mind and the brain, right?
I didn't follow any of that.
Well, it's just saying now we have substance dualism, right? To say, well, if you affect the brain, you affect the mind, but that doesn't say the mind is physical. Or, yeah, that doesn't say the mind is physical. That just say the mind has a relation to the brain.
Yeah, that's fine, but there's no I've never seen anybody produce any evidence or argument or anything that the mental states alter the brain states. It always happens from a very bottom up in a bottom up way or whatever.
I mean, so you say the brain states affect the mind states or the mental states, but you say the mental states doesn't affect the brain states?
I've never heard anybody give an example of that ever occurring.
I don't know if I'm right on this, but I'm pretty sure there was an article somewhere saying, well, we're giving an example or like some type of data or some shit. Because I was looking at the I mean, even then, I feel like it's more of a thing. Well, if the brain affects the mind, and to what we know, the mind hasn't affected the brain. Well, then it just seems like we haven't had a situation where the mind would affect the brain. I mean, that kind of seems really disingenuous to say, but I just don't see the idea and the reason behind why the brain would affect the mind, but the mind wouldn't affect the brain. It just seems like we haven't come to an outcome that would allow for such thing or permit such conditions.
I'm completely open to evidence for it. All I'm telling you is all we know is this. I think minds emerge. I don't think you have to have a brain to have a mind. Oh, he left. I'll just finish my thought. But I don't think you have to have a brain, a cerebrum, to have a mind. I think a mind is something that comes about, and maybe consciousness, whatever, is something that comes about once you have a sufficiently complex computing system. And then, and because it's emergent, then I don't think you can ever run it backwards. Like, you can't say traffic causes cars. Cars cause traffic. And then that's the only way you get traffic in the world. So, well, we'll have to leave it at that, I guess.